Welcome to Stories from the Top. I'm your host, Lance Tanaka, and I'll be interviewing successful executives from the best of the best global companies about leadership and their journey. Okay, listeners, are you ready for a treat? Well, I'm sitting down with Mark Struczewski, better known as Mr. Productivity. And I tell you, this guy is obsessed. And what I mean by obsessed, he is obsessed to help you become a more productive version of yourself. He's the host of the Mark Struczewski podcast. He has a website, mrproductivity.com. You go there, you can get insights into productivity courses, blogs, newsletters. So, welcome, Mr. Productivity.
Lance, I don't think I've ever been labeled as a treat other than by my wife. So thank you very much for calling me that.
Well, that's a good thing. I don't think you'd want her to call you anything else.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mark, it really is a joy to have you on, and I'd like you to share with my listeners, what do you do and why do you do it?
Well, what I try to tell people I do is, because no one ever comes to me via my website, social media, whatever, and says, I want to be more productive. That's not the words they use. I hear the word overwhelm a lot. I'm so overwhelmed with my to-do list, with all the things on my schedule. And so I help people untangle the mess of overwhelm. Think of it like we always used to have those corded Apple phone earpods. And, whenever you wanted to go use them, they were all tangled up and you're trying to unravel everything. That's kind of what I do to help people. They come to me and they're like, I can't unwrap these headphones. And that's what I help them deal with.
Okay, great. Well, we'll get back to productivity a little bit later. But I'd like to start with, in the book Stories from the Top, I share about the 8 common leadership challenges facing leaders. And the number one by far is this one about finding your purpose and, becoming an authentic leader. Essentially be the person or the leader you were designed to be. And I know you're living your dream, you're living your purpose. So if you can kind of share with my listeners, what was your journey? How did you get there?
Well, I started late. The reason why I'm doing what I'm doing now is the result of me being fired back in July 2005. So prior to that, I spent some time in radio broadcasting. I was an on-air radio DJ. I then got into materials management, inventory management. And then I was fired from my job in the summer of 2005, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I decided, what's that word? Entrepreneur. So I said, I'll be that. I didn't know what it was, could barely say it, couldn't spell it, that's for sure. And so as I began my entrepreneur journey, I was trying to find what I could, my business could be. So I tried wedding and portrait photography and a couple other things. And I was beginning to get kind of sad. What am I going to do? Because I really love helping people, speaking, training. And I was on a phone call with my coach at the time, and they said, what's going on? You're not your usual happy self. And I'm like, well, I found what I really want to do in my life, but I don't know what the topic should be. I've tried these topics. Nothing seems to be resonating. And I never forget, they said to me, he says, well, why don't you talk about productivity? And I said to him, I don't know where that came from, but why would you say that? He goes, I know a lot of people, and you are one of the most productive people I know. You should share that gift with the world. And I'm like, really? I'm like, do people really want to learn about this? And he goes, yeah, they do. And so I hung out my shingle, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Great. And what are some of the things that you did to identify this?
Well, I got to give all the credit to my coach, because he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And that's why I'm a big proponent of coaches, because coaches, you're in the forest, you can't see the trees. A coach is outside and going, well, have you thought about this? Or why are you doing this? But you do it all the time. It becomes kind of autopilot for you. And so it took somebody outside of my immediate sphere of influence said, hey, you should look into productivity. And to be honest with you, Lance, I wasn't even thinking about that. It wasn't even on my radar because I did it all the time. I foolishly thought that everyone was as productive as I am.
Okay, so then you start identifying, well, maybe I need to be, talking about productivity, what kind of barriers or challenges did you face in getting to where you are now?
Myself.
Yes.
I mean, because I was thinking to myself, like, I mean, this came so easy to me being productive. I'm like, are people actually pay me to share what's in my zone of genius? And I had to battle that for years because I kept saying, who am I? Why would anybody want to learn from me? I mean, I'm just this guy who grew up in Rochester, New York. I live in Houston, Texas. I mean, I'm no one special. But then as I started studying high performers like Tony Robbins and Grant Cardone and Brendan Burchard, they started from nothing and they built their empires. And they just had a gift. And I finally conquered that and said, look, I can help people. But I remember it was several years I had a battle with that because I had the poser syndrome, that I was a fraud. I mean, why would anybody want to give me any money to help them? But then I realized that they were in a position where they needed my help. They were struggling with something that was very easy for me to do.
Yeah, you should have come to me in 2005. I would have helped you with that. But but the point is that this is a gift. Whether you were born with it, it's DNA, or through nurture or experience, whatever, it's a gift. And successful people identify what that gift is. This is my strength. This is my passion, and leverage the heck out of it. An LT observation. When trying to figure out his next chapter of his career, Mark found that productivity was easy for him. It was his gift. Why not use it? But he had to overcome the imposter syndrome.
But sometimes when you're in the battle, you can't see everything because you're just worried about, okay, how am I going to pay the bills this month? How, I have to learn how to build a website. Oh, I have to get an email list. And so all these things start crowding in your mind. And when you get too obsessed with these things that are important, but not the main focus, then you start losing your excitement about your main zone of genius.
Sure. And if you don't mind me asking, in 2005, you were, that's when you went through the transition. How old were you then?
Wow.
You got to do math.
Yeah, you didn't tell me there's math on the show. Well, I'm 56 now. And so that was, 16 years ago? So about 39 years old, 40 years old?
Yeah. I mean, that just shows you is that actually you're never too old to make the change, especially if you're truly leveraging your gifting. And the other thing is that when you have a bad event that occurs, there's always something to it. There's always that silver lining. And if you get up off the ground and say, okay, that's not good, I didn't like that, but what am I going to do about it? And that's what you did.
Well, what's interesting is now that I have time to reflect on it after all these years, it was more of Mama Bird kicking me out of the nest because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was going to a job Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, doing inventory management. I was kind of good at it, but I had no passion in it. And I was too scared to move on, to go out and try something on my own. I was 39, 40 years old. I was newly married. And then I got fired from my job, which forced me to make a quick decision. And I wonder, Lance, that if I would never have gotten fired, would I still be at that company doing the same job all these years later? Of course, I don't know. And quite frankly, I'm glad that I never got the chance to find out.
Yeah, and I'm sure that was the catalyst that got you moving. But I'm sure something along your life would have hit you in the head and say, hey, Mark, you're wasting your life here. You're not doing what you should be doing. There's a reason why you're here. Mm-hmm. Now go off and do it, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I grew up as a blue collar family. Mom was a secretary, dad was a machinist, and their whole goal was let's work real hard, save, and then retire. And I was probably an entrepreneur before I was ever one. I always thought that. I'm like, I don't want to work for 35, 40 years, retire, and like just sit in a rocking chair on the porch. That doesn't appeal to me. And my parents, they never understood what you're a speaker, you're an entrepreneur. To this day, my parents don't know what I do, but I love what I do. And I tell my dad I work 7 days a week because it's not work for me. I really love what I do.
Yeah. Well, that's the much has been written about the greatest generation, which is our parents' generation. They really didn't have lots of choice.
Nope.
But our generation has lots of choice. And then when you look at the next generations, they have tremendous amount of choice. And, that's wonderful, but it's also daunting for people.
Well, I tell people I'm 56 years young, and I say at least 44 more years to go because I've got so much stuff I got to get done. I can't leave until I hit triple digits.
There you go. You got a long way to go yet. And speaking of authenticity then, or gifting, and you work with a lot of leaders. You work with a lot of these successful people. What do you feel like is how do you help them with their authenticity? How do you help them really realize, okay, this is who I am. This is my leadership persona, or these are my strengths, or these are my gifting?
The most powerful question I ask any client is why? Because they come to me and they say, these are my challenges. And instead of going, well, what you do is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. We have a conversation to find out why. And I'm amazed, Lance, at the number of people that never entertain the question why. They just do it because that's the way they are trained. That's the schooling they went to. That's the way the company brought them on to do the job. And I'm like, okay, before we untangle the headphone wires, why do they need to be untangled to begin with? And they'll just like, I'm sorry, that's not what I hired you for. I said, yeah, but I've been doing this for a while, and I know that if we don't get to the root, the why, if I give you the solution and you go away and you untangle the headphones, they're going to eventually get tangled up again. And so I'm really a big proponent of figuring out the why. And I think that goes in any industry, personal, professional. If you are struggling, always go back to the why. And if you don't know the why, you need to dig pretty deep on that.
An LT observation. Why is the most powerful question. If you're struggling, go to why. I mean, we have a tendency to focus on what. Mm-hmm. And then maybe once we figured out what, then we'll go to how.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's missing oftentimes is why. The other thing I also see is when leaders are leading people, they're giving direction. And that tends to be, again, the what or the how. And what people really want to know is why. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a very powerful point.
Yeah, you're 100% right. So example I like to use is like, let's say someone's got a job and they have to present a report. They have to create a report to give it to the supervisor, and they said it's got to be done by 9. The supervisor or the manager wants it at 9 a.m. But then the employee realizes he doesn't even open the email until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So okay, why do you have to have it done by 3 if he's not looking at it until 6 o'clock, until 6 hours later at 3 o'clock? That's a small example, but you say, okay, listen, do I need to do this now, or does it have to be done by 3? Now, like I said, simple example, but they were trained at 9 o'clock, but the guy doesn't look at it till 3. And you have to take baby steps. If you're going to make changes in your life or in the corporation world or professional, you have to sit here and go, okay, do I understand the why? Now, usually, not always, when you're in the corporate world, the why is pretty much everybody knows the why is. What I see a lot of people struggle with when they're entrepreneurs or have a small business, they're so busy serving clients that they're not concerned about the why, and they're wasting a lot of time doing things that don't ever have to be done.
Sure. I caught something you said there, baby steps. Hold that thought. Well, I'm sure we'll get to that when we talk about productivity. Okay, so let's shift. Let's go to Mr. Productivity now. And in that book, Story from the Top, there are 8 common challenges facing leaders. We just did number 1, which is about purpose. The number 2 one that I see when I'm working with leaders, I call it get a life and take control of your career. Because so many people put that control into other people's hands. Or they feel like they're a victim because they have no control over their schedule. It's their spouse, it's their boss, it's the emails, it's the phone calls coming in, and I can't breathe, and I'm a victim, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. What kind of advice would you give to people? Because just about everybody is struggling with this issue.
I love how you say get a life. My wife and I go to a Bible study on Saturday nights, and I'm the only entrepreneur in the class. And most of the people in the class are in their low 60s, and they're like, Mark, what are you going to do about retirement? Like, retire? I don't understand. Why would I want to retire when I'm doing what I love to do? And they're like, well, you're eventually going to, you're eventually going to die. Don't you want to end your life doing things you want to do? And I'm like, again, I'm already doing that. Why do I have to retire to do that? And now, granted, these people grew up in a different age than me, and they grew up and you go to college and you go work at a company for 35, 40 years, you retire, go play golf or rock on the porch. And I'm like, but that's not a life for me. And if that's what you want to do, I have no problem with that whatsoever. Okay. And that's why I've learned real early in the game, don't hang around people who are not entrepreneurs, because they don't understand the way we operate. They're like, you should retire at this age, and then you should join this country club, and you should golf this many times a day or a week. And I'm like, I don't like golf. I can't imagine just sitting around watching TV. So I love how you said, get a life. And I always tell people when they come to me, the first question I ask people is, why did you reach out to me? And that really catches people off guard, because they're like, don't you want my money? I'm like, but I want to make sure you understand what we're in for. We're not here for quick fixes. I want to make sure that when you leave my coaching, you're much better off than you were when you first came in. And I've never used the phrase get a life, but I really like that, because I would estimate Pareto's principles alive and well in this day and age. I think 80% of the people don't have any kind of life they really want. 20% do, but 80% are just, well, I got a nice job, I got vacation, I got perks, company car, whatever, but they don't have a life that they want, a life of their choosing.
Well, I'll let you use that phrase, get a life, but there's going to be a royalty involved.
You sound like Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank.
There you go. But let's talk about productivity then. When you're dealing with people, are there certain things that keep coming up over and over?
Yes. There is a sea over in Israel called the Dead Sea. Unfortunately, a lot of people's to-do lists are like the Dead Sea. In other words, a lot of things flow into it. It flows on their to-do list. And every once in a while, something will come off. And so what happens is, as you know, you get a bucket, it's empty, and you keep pouring water, and eventually it's going to overflow. This is what most people's to-do list is. So what I try to tell people, again, we're going back to that question of why. Okay, why is this going to go on your to-do list? Number two, are you actually ever going to do this? What are the odds of you doing this? Now, some people will put the to-do in the app, and what they'll do is they'll recur it. So they'll say, remind me Monday at 3:00, and then they say complete, and it comes up on Tuesday, and then Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. And I'm like, okay, eventually, you're never going to do this. You're never going to do this. And so I'm like, before you put something on your calendar or your to-do list, is this something that you have to do? Like, is it going to be done? Is it going to move the needle? I guess is the word I'm looking for. Is it going to move the needle? And I would encourage people to really stop every time they go add something to do list. Before they just throw it on the to-do list, stop and go, okay, does this need to be done? If it does need to be done, doesn't need to be done by me. Maybe there's another person in my company that can do it. So we got to I think I applaud people for putting these items on the to-do list, because you're getting them out of your head on a to-do list. That's great. But the problem is, if they just go to the to-do list to die, well, then you look at the to-do list, it's a whole mess. There's all kinds of, to-dos on here. You're like, then you give up, you throw your hands out. Then you do what some people do. They just go get another to-do list app and you start from scratch. Well, you haven't corrected the behavior, because your first app is a mess. Now you gave up and created a new one. Now, because you haven't created the behavior, the second one's going to be just like the first one. And so I always get people to stop. And if people would just stop for 15 seconds and go, all right, do I need to put this on my list? For example, how many times has your listeners gone, well, I did a task, it wasn't my to-do list, I'll put it on my to-do list just so I have the satisfaction of checking it off.
Yeah. And
everyone I do that when I'm speaking in front of an audience, most people raise their hands. And they're like, yeah, I've done that. Why? Just so you have the satisfaction of checking the task off. And I'm like, that's kind of silly, because it gives you that little bit dopamine hit for a second, but it's not really moving the needle forward.
Yeah. You were referring, I think, to the 80-20 principle. When it comes to these lists, is that what you're saying? Is that you got to look at the 20%, the critical things?
Yes, because a lot of people they're spending time working on stuff that doesn't matter. Okay. For example, I want to tweak the font, not the copy. You want to tweak the font size or the style on your website. Or maybe you want to work on your bio for Instagram. Or maybe you want to scroll through Twitter. Is that really moving the needle? And I would argue that 80% of the time that people are spending doing productive activities, they're really wasting time. We need to figure out what are those activities that are going to move the needle forward. Like for me, I create a daily podcast, I create a daily YouTube video. I'm constantly creating content from my email list. I'm helping my clients. Those are important things. But people, they think being busy is being productive. Well, you can be busy just being busy, or you can be busy being productive, but those are two entirely different things. So if you're just endlessly scrolling, checking your inbox or fixing your email signature, that's not going to bring you any money or any clients. Okay. You got to focus on the things that are really going to help serve the people and bring them in as clients. And a lot of people, because let's face it, technology is on 24/7, 365, and technology can allow you to be distracted. And that's something else I deal with. People are so distracted because you have so many social media sites and the social media is not on your side. That's why they have endless scrolling. And so you can't rely on the technology like Facebook, for example, to help you be productive. You've got to take that burden on yourself, or otherwise you'll never get anything done.
Yeah, I would say most of the people would agree with that I need to choose the most critical things. But people often struggle with how do I do that? So do you have any advice on how to help somebody figure out of all the stuff that I'm facing, what should I really focus on? What's the most important?
Yeah, what I encourage people to do is whether you do it at the end of the day or the morning of, I would even do this electronically. I would get a piece of paper or a notebook and just say, okay, what do I need to do today? And I wouldn't put more than 3 things on your list and really think, what do I do today? What can I do today that's going to move the needle? And then once you determine what those up to 1 to 3 things are, then I want you to actually put it on your calendar. Now, you're already going to have other things on your calendar. Maybe interviewing a podcast, or you have a coaching client. But what about those other spots? What are you going to fill those other spots with? Because if you don't put something there, you're more likely to go procrastinate on Facebook or Instagram. So I would just take a few minutes to think about, what can I do today that's going to move the needle? I recently heard this. I love this. We all know who Bob Hope was. He's one of the very few people that crossed over from vaudeville to radio to TV. And I heard a story that someone told me, I think it was Grant Cardone, that says that every day Bob Hope woke up, he'd say, what can I do today to promote Bob Hope? And I think we need to do that as entrepreneurs and leaders. When we wake up every day, what can I do today that's going to further my mission? We need to actually think about it, not passively, not like when you're checking the news and scrolling through Facebook. I mean, just get quiet. Maybe go out on your back porch, get a bullet journal or some other notebook and say, okay, what can I do today? What do I have to do today? If we would just slow down for 5 to 10 minutes and intentionally think about that question, I think we would be astronomically further ahead.
Great point. I'd like to go back to something that you said earlier. Again, when I'm working with leaders on this area of getting a life, there's sometimes this tendency to look for the big plan, the big move, if I do this, this is going to make a significant impact on me or the business. And something you talked about earlier was baby steps. So could you talk to that?
When I teach people, for example, how to begin planning, they're like, okay, so we're going to do the week, the month, the quarter, the 6 months. Oh, stop. Let's worry about the next hour. Yeah, you are looking at 6 months down the road when you don't have a clue what you're going to do in 20 minutes when this coaching session ends. So let's figure out what you're going to do next. And that sounds so simple, but I would argue that if you can't figure out what you're going to do the next hour, why are you worried about tomorrow or next week or next month? You have to get back to the basics. You have to take that baby step. So let's say a coaching call from 8 to 9. Okay, let's worry about 9 o'clock. Okay, you got nailed down 9 o'clock. Okay, you're going to write your book from 9 to 11. Great. Okay, what are you going to do at 11? Okay, when are you going to take lunch? Because you're going to have lunch, right? Yeah, okay. You got to walk the dog. When are you going to walk the dog? And start building these blocks. But too many people are worried about the big picture. The big picture is for those people who have a clue on how to plan the rest of today, tomorrow, the week, the month, the quarter. The big picture, when you're talking about a big picture, people, they know how to plan both ends. But if you don't know how to do anything about planning, let's start with the next hour. What is the next thing you need to do first? Get that done, then move on to the next thing. When you get to be really good at planning, then you can start looking long range and reverse engineering.
An LT observation. If you can't figure out what to do in the next hour, why worry about the next week? Get back to basics. Take baby steps. What other things do you see when you're dealing with people on productivity?
Again, it goes back to the multiplicity of distractions that we have. I tell people, you need to look at something like what I call a notification cleanse. Too many people have too many notifications turned on their phone. Now, I'm not a zero notifications guy. I'm an intentional notifications guy. So what a notification cleanse is go through all your apps on all your devices and ask yourself, do I need this notification turned on? If it's not serving you, and I would argue most notifications don't serve you, then you need to turn them off. And even if they are serving you, do you need to have a sound? Because on many phones now, you can say, okay, I want the notification to pop up, but I don't want the sound, or I don't want one of those badge counts to tell you how many unread messages. So take the time to go through every app you have and determine if the notification is going to serve you or distract you. And then put a reminder on your to-do list the first, I don't care, first Friday, first Saturday, whatever, every month, go through your notifications again in case any slip through. If people would do that, you would be light years ahead, because so many people, when they install an app, they just allow all notifications, and every 3 seconds, their phone's making a noise. Well, how can you focus? How can you get clarity? How can you be productive if your phone keeps binging and vibrating? You can't. So go through that, wipe out most of those notifications, keep only the ones that are really going to serve you. Like, I live in Houston, so I have my weather app on because I need to know if a tornado's coming to my house. That's important. But I don't have Facebook turned on because I can go in the app anytime I want. So people got to go through the notifications, figure out what they want turned on that's going to serve them. But I would argue that you don't need email, you don't need social media, and get rid of the news apps off your phone. That's only going to cause you stress. You don't need to know. If you really want to know, go to Twitter and you'll get the latest news there.
So true. We often don't get good news, do we, through these apps?
Nope. Because the good news doesn't sell.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
If it bleeds, it leads.
There you go. Now you're talking about getting rid of distractions. So I would put that in the kind of the bucket of you need to get space.
Yes.
Okay. So when, let's say you're in the office, and what suggestions would you give to people about how to get that space? Yeah, one thing, turn off distractions, but there's always going to be somebody knocking on your door. There's always somebody who wants to schedule a meeting. Are there any kind of techniques people should use to be able to get that space so they can kind of, at times, just think?
Yeah. What you're talking about is boundaries. A lot of people have no boundaries, zero boundaries. Whenever someone comes by their office, whenever someone calls them, whenever they get a Slack message or internal IM, they stop what they're doing. And what I've been training people to do is, when you want to go what Cal Newport calls deep focus, you disable the notifications, you shut down your email system. Now, a lot of corporations don't want you doing that. But true leaders, if you really want your employees to work effectively, they're going to have some quiet time. Okay. Now, if you live, I would say live, some people may think it's live, but if you work in an open cubicle, the open area where the walls are 6 foot high and people can look over them, and you really need to focus, then see if you can go to an office that's not occupied with a door, or maybe you can sign out the conference room. and go there, and don't tell anybody where you are and work on your project, because I understand when you're constantly being bothered. You know, if you constantly get distracted by people walking by, or if you hear someone in the next office, you know, talking about their golf game, it's really difficult to focus. But you're going to have to stop going along to get along. If you truly want to be a really productive employee, you're going to have to make some hard choices. You're going to have to set boundaries. You may not make a lot of friends, but I'm sure if you have a quality leader, they're going to want you to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah, interesting about the open office concept. Everybody moved to it, but now people are starting to find, well, maybe this is maybe this doesn't work so well.
Yep.
Because it is about boundaries. It is about distractions, and how can you focus when you've got all the stimuli all around you? Okay, great. Well, I told everybody this is going to be a treat, and it certainly is. How could people best contact you?
The best way to go is to my website, MrProductivity.com. Mr. is all spelled out. That does take you to MarkStruczewski.com. So if you're in Poland and you happen to be listening to the show, you can just type MarkStruczewski.com, because you probably know how to spell my last name. But for the rest of the world, just go to MrProductivity.com. It'll shoot you right over there. There you can join my free Mark Struczewski Insider list, which is my email list. You'll get my top 5 productivity tips there. You can find out about my membership, my monthly membership, my course, my podcast, my blog. Anything and everything you want to find out about me and so much more is all at MrProductivity.com.
Okay, great. And to the listeners, as I said in the book, Stories from the Top, the number 2 challenge for leaders is around getting a life. And here's the guy, Mr. Productivity. Mark is the guy. So I would strongly suggest that you visit his website, listen to his podcasts, and contact him.
Well, I appreciate that. And you were recently on my show, so they can go find my podcast on their favorite podcast player. Just scroll down. You have to scroll for a little bit because I do a podcast every day, but you did a fantastic job on my show, and I want to thank you again for being on my show. My
pleasure. And it actually was fun. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And that's because you are obsessed. Okay, Mark, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, take care. Check out my other interviews with successful leaders and stories from the top. And also check out LanceTanakaGroup.com.